People who often like to have hours-long conversations. How do you manage to talk so long without running out of things to say, and doesn't it make you tired to talk for such a long time? With the right person, when you have a connection, sometimes conversation is practically effortless. There is a natural flow to conversation, especially after you've known the person a while. I am an introvert, so it does usually make me tired to talk for a long time. Yes. But there are a few people who have somehow managed to get into my inner introvert circle, and talking to them doesn't tire me. Well, it depends on the other person. If they give you really short answers and don't engage much, I run out of things to talk about really fast. But if the other person continues the conversation, before we know it, a few hours have passed. It's invigorating, if not dehydrating, to vibe with someone and swap stories and experiences with them for hours on end. Exactly, it takes two. Sometimes you're compatible with someone in that way, sometimes you aren't. Sometimes you think you aren't and then end up getting in the groove and talking for hours. I'm generally introverted, but if you get me with the right people, I can easily talk for hours. I'll share a story of the best Valentine's Day I ever had. My plans kinda fell through. My roommates, who were and still are together, didn't have anything planned for Valentine's Day. They have their own thing. So we all ended up getting drunk together. Well, my homie started going on about Warhammer 40k, which I had only a vague knowledge of at the time. He proceeded to spend 3 hours explaining various things to me and looking up stuff. I couldn't help but admire his passion and I got into the lore myself. But we spent the entire night jumping from conversation to conversation about various genres, until we both passed out on the couch. That was some fun times. I like long conversations because there is so much to talk about in this world. Talk about what you like, dislike, what you're for and what you're against, what you find bland, and what you're passionate about. Talk about how something made you feel, versus something that you learned through adversity, or a failure you made that has given you perspective. It's hard to have long conversations with people who give one-word responses, or when you see the judgment in their eyes. I have a very judgmental mother. It's hard to talk to people without feeling like I'm going to disappoint them or bore them, unless of course I'm talking to a good friend. I think your partner makes all the difference when it comes to this. I've had a few rare times where I couldn't get enough of someone, in which case, it almost doesn't matter what they say, I'm happy. That's when it's a pleasure, not a chore. Otherwise I just won't do it either. Yeah, exactly. I'm not really a talkative person, but when I'm with friends, I can talk for hours without it getting tiring or stale. Me and my ex, we just clicked. We used to have 8+ hour video calls daily, just constantly talking. It was honestly amazing. I haven't met anyone like her since. Feels bad. I had the same thing. Thankfully, with years of hard work, we are really good friends now. I firmly believe we have some kind of deep connection, but we're never meant to be together romantically. Just go with the flow. It helps if the other person does the same, of course. Actively listen and respond to what the person is saying. Don't save up things to say and say them when the other person is done talking. This is key. Depends on the person. My bestie, who I sadly don't see too often anymore, thanks pandemic, we'd literally lay on the couch and living room floor for hours, just chatting. We'd normally start by catching up on life things, and then we'd discuss whatever's on our minds that might be controversial to others. She's one of maybe 3 people I can literally say anything and get no judgment. Sometimes, random thoughts that pop into my head that may not be appropriate in other settings, I'll blurt it out and she'd just go with the flow. Our chats normally go for hours. Long conversations don't work like small talk, where you pick a sort of general, safe topic, and both people take short turns swapping personal information and generalities. Long conversations work more like a discussion-based college class. You spend less time talking about yourself and more time talking about, like, how one cartoonist compares to a different cartoonist, or how different fiber arts work, or social norms in Renaissance Venice. Basically, it's more analytical and you're usually learning something. Also, don't just sit still. Go for a walk with the person. Or if you're talking on the phone, do chores while you talk. It helps keep you engaged and alert. I second this about going for a walk. Something about the movement, oxygen to the brain and being in nature, if possible, really gets the conversation going. Walking talks are also great for resolving conflict, probably for the same reasons, but also because walking side by side feels less confrontational than facing one another. Ugh. I go off on tangents all over the place, and so do the people I'm talking to. A lot of times it's like, what was I talking about? How did I get on the subject of my mom's car being in the shop? This is with friends and closer acquaintances, not with strangers. I have a friend who does this, telling stories, and in my head I'm silently screaming, get to the freaking point. I'm a chatterbox, and I know a little bit about a lot of things, so I can always carry a conversation in some topic. It's also a form of socialization. I grew up in a society where talking was the heart of the evening. You don't go to dinner with your friends to have dinner, you go to talk, and the food is there to give you something to do while you converse. It's also quite stimulating and invigorating when you run into someone else who shares similar interests. One of my best friends would spend literally hours, I'm talking 3+, with me, just talking about different movies, scenes we enjoyed, shows, stories, etc. For the record, 80% of the time we're literally talking about things we've both seen, read, yet we can still kill that many hours together talking about them. It reinforces and forges bonds between people. You sound lovely. I really like people like you, fellow chatterbox. I am only capable of holding long conversations. I can't do small talk. On one hand, I am just not interested in small talk, so I try my best to avoid it. On the other hand, if it actually happens, it gets really weird very fast. I have a couple of topics that are very interesting to me and I spent a lot of time thinking about them, so if they come up in a conversation I can easily talk about them for hours and hours. I once had a 16-hour long conversation with a friend. I was at his place and we talked for about 9 hours that day until it got late, so I went home and slept, and after I woke up I immediately went to his place again to finish the conversation, talking for another 7 hours. This happened right after we shared a psychedelic experience. Both of us had a lot of mental progress that day. I learned a lot about my personality and behavior, and he ultimately stopped smoking and realized a bunch of other bad habits he worked on quitting. Of course, this is an extreme case, but I would honestly love to do that with more people. Same. The thing is, I don't know how to turn small talk to an actual conversation without being awkward. It should be noted that I'm usually into more niche subjects. Me and my best mate can talk for hours on end. Each conversation leads into the next. Lots of branching topics which all link together. Conversation might have started off with, what games have you been playing lately, and an hour or two down the line we've ended up at why time travel in a film show is ultimately the worst idea. I don't force anything. If they don't want to talk, then it's alright. There is no such thing as awkward silence. It's only awkward if you make it awkward. And then when I find someone whose hobbies are the same as mine, the conversation is just smooth. It's only awkward if you make it awkward. Best thing I've learned recently. Conversation should be fluid and never just cover one topic. The universe is infinite and therefore a conversation could go on forever. Just like other people have mentioned, it takes two. But if both people want to have a conversation, then it could be endless. I rarely have a conversation with my sister that lasts less than an hour. Another important factor is a genuine curiosity about everything. People love talking about themselves and their interests, so if you can find any kind of common ground, you've got a good conversation starter. Also, be truthful. If you just blindly and politely agree with everything that people say, they're going to feel that you're not being genuine and want out. For example, so do you play video games? No, I really don't have the coordination for that, but I'm an avid Sudoku puzzler. I taught myself during a very boring lecture in college and now I can't stop. You have just opened up several paths for conversation there. That's the key, is to leave the paths open. Sometimes talking can be tiring depending on the person and what else we might be doing. Especially if I am talking to a really negative person, it really wipes me out. Usually starts with asking something about their experience or expertise. They have to deep and interesting conversations that roll through a lot of different topics. I don't like small talk, but I've found most people have something they will talk about for hours. You just need to find the right entry point and a somewhat private space, of course. It usually bounces between funny inside joke type talk and more personal conversations or academic discussion for me. Listening more than talking. If you're interested, you'll ask questions, and people love to be heard and feel like they're interesting, so chats can go on for hours by simply prompting your companion. I think though when it comes to a longer conversation, you also need to know how to insert related anecdotes and things like that. For me, it's the conversation partner if they are of a similar mindset. You are golden. Me and my best friend have been having the same conversation for about 7 months now, interrupted only by life, haha. Functional social skills. I feel this can't be emphasized enough. Socializing is a skill set, combining active listening, posture, tone, knowing one's audience and being informed and confident enough to contribute to conversations with asides, jokes, references and memes. It takes practice, so call your mother and get some practice in. Totally true. I was painfully shy for a while. I became a bartender and put myself in uncomfortable situations because I wanted to build social skills. It worked. Depends on the person I'm with. Also, life is filled with literally so much stuff. Work life, love life, my favorite TV shows. The list can go on. So true. I go on walks with my best friend nearly every day. We usually just start with small talk, like how was your day, etc. Then the conversation just casually evolves. Sometimes we'll talk about a specific thing that we did that day, like say I've been playing Red Dead. I'll tell him which parts of the story I've done today, and he'll then continue on with video games he's played lately. Then we might jump to him having played something at his dad's place, and then we get to talk about that or what else he has been doing over there. Going for walks or being in public is generally a good idea when you're planning on having a long conversation. You can point out certain people or things and then go from there. Like, wow, that's a cool garden. I'd definitely put that thing in my garden if I had the chance. Or I'd want it to look like this and that, and so on. Then the other person gets their chance to show what they'd want their garden to look like. And yes, personally, I find it sometimes gets exhausting. Then we just sit down somewhere and hang out in silence. Lots of people think that could be awkward, but it really isn't when you're with the right person. It can be great to just hang out and be quiet together, especially after a long conversation. You can process everything the other person has told you. Think about new things you might have learned, or just collect your thoughts so you know what else to talk about next. Then just start talking again when you've got an idea what you want to speak about. We do take breaks from hanging out when we're too exhausted from it, because that definitely happens sometimes. Then we'll just stay by ourselves for a day or two, and then when we feel like it, we hang out again. It also really depends on the person you're talking to. If they're not very responsive, it's definitely harder. I just blabber on about anything and everything because I get nervous when it's a person I don't know that well and tend to overshare when nervous. And then sometimes they randomly get engaged at a certain topic that they find interesting as well, and then we can actually talk. And if not, if you're going for a walk, you can still just enjoy the silence and your surroundings together. The best conversations I've had took place on long walks or hikes. Something about it is just conducive to conversation. 1. Have interesting things to say. 2. Think about the things you say. 3. Be interested in the things the other person says. 4. Think about the things the other person says. Blah blah blah, and all of a sudden it's been 3 hours. It's called ADHD adds chef's kiss. But for typical neurological brains, I think the trick is to find things you find interesting and talk about that. Try to engage the other by using your imagination. For example, if you think going to space and space flights is interesting, you could say, would you want to go to Mars when we can? But also just general things like, do you like reading? What do you love the most about it? But if you get tired, obviously I don't think you'll make the greatest conversation partner, so maybe it's more about the quality of the conversation than it is about quantity. A lot of factors count in. My boyfriend and I sometimes end up talking for 8 hours straight, and sometimes we run out of things to talk about, so we either stay on vid call and go about our day or cut the call and do our work. It honestly depends on the person on the other side. Sometimes though, you might not have the energy to talk, and I think the other person should respect it if you're feeling like that. I try to engage the partner in something I'm interested in, and when the conversation gets stale I ask them about their interest opinion on things. Just go with the flow, dude. Sometimes people just don't click. Also yes, after talking for like 6 hours with someone in one day, yeah, it can get tiring to try and come up with new topics to keep the conversation flowing. Don't force yourself to have these kinds of conversations, since it likely won't be as enjoyable as it would be if it had happened organically. Asking questions is key. It's hard to listen to someone that goes on and on as if you are just a sounding board and not part of a conversation. Listening to a monologue can be exhausting. If both people are asking questions of the other, the conversation can go on indefinitely, in a good way. It all depends on the person. I had a date in February where we just stood in her kitchen and talked for like 3.5 hours. We jumped from topic to topic over hours, just trading the spotlight. I was exhausted by the end of it, but it was the kind of exhausted that comes after the right amount of adrenaline and pride that you turned your brain to full speed and had someone that could keep pace. We didn't work out and I'm not mad about it, but dang, I miss her as a conversationalist. I happen to spend from at least 4 to up to 17 hours talking with my girlfriend every day, not once tired of discussion or out of topics. We're both very talkative and we're both full of life curiosity. There's always something you can talk about. And when brain starts to overheat because you didn't sleep for way too long already and it's 4 AM, you just talk about bulls like lizard jeans or the definition of river and laugh at it as if it's the funniest thing ever. In brief, I just mean you have to talk to someone who gets you. Then talking is just going. Well, everything kind of branches off into something else, and I like those ideas to be explored and how they connect back to the original conversation. I like exploring multiple point of views and ideas, especially ones I do not hold or have yet to explore. It's also significantly easier with someone who has a personality you find interesting. It does make me tired talking for so long because being in contact with people seems to drain my energy, but if it's a conversation I find interesting or an individual who I find interesting, then it's more of a satisfactory feeling. Like staying up late to read a great book. Honestly, me and my best friend can talk for hours while on a walk, and it often comes down to us going off on single tangents in the middle of a different thoughts and taking about subverting we see while we walk. We literally had an hour-long conversation mostly joking about Nerf guns because my friend compulsively bought one after I convinced him by saying he could shoot it at anyone who came in his room. By throwing in some jokes and other topics that pique interests of both sides of the conversation. Or if you can't think of something to say, just throw in something random but interesting for you and hope it's interesting enough to continue the conversation. If not, abort mission. It's a fail. There's no saving it now. Salute to what once was a conversation. I can't find the salute emoji, but this popped out, so here you go. Ask questions to someone who talks back and that you like listening to. It's impossible to run out of things to say if you just like sharing with someone. It would take longer to recite my whole life than it takes to live it. I can talk about moments of my life for longer than they took to do. You're doing it right now. You typed one sentence. Look how much came back to you. Sometimes I get tired, but only when another part of life besides talking sounds better to me. Sometimes you're just so in sync with that other person that you don't even notice. My roommate and I like to say we're on the same wavelength or have a hive mind because of this. I have this sort of relationship with everyone in my inner circle of friends. Consists of like 3 people. They were just people I clicked with really well, and long conversations are par of the course. But we also don't text all day or anything. I don't know how people can text other people all day. I guess they probably wonder how I can talk with my besties for hours. My cousin is like that. He talks for hours and hours without any engagement from anyone else and completely missing any and all social cues. Worst guest to have over. It depends. I'm quite introverted, and 5 minutes of small talk can leave me exhausted, but 3 hours of in-depth conversation around something interesting is quite common for me. My girlfriend is extroverted. She handles the small talk like a boss but yawns if the topic of conversation hasn't changed after 7 minutes. It all depends on who you talk to really. Good conversation can only be held if both parties engage, otherwise it's just a one-way street, especially when the other person makes the conversation awkward. I'm a very talkative person and I often find myself talking about even the most boring topics with interest. Example of a usual conversation. My manager and I spent a good amount of time just talking about irrigation, from where our irrigation source is to how our irrigation system has and will change. BTW, this conversation arose when I found a metal pipe in a paddock. Example of a bad conversation. Me. How are you? Other. I'm good. Me. Oh yeah, that's good. Other. Yeah. I used to be like that whereby I was younger until a classmate had told me how annoying I was and that I should shut up for once, which has stuck with me since then. I mostly talked about Hunter x Hunter and Death Note. My mom seemed like she loved listening to me and always asked me if I could tell her more about this thing called Nen. I talked at the Panthan Troop. 10. Zetsu. Ren. Hatsu. Shu. In. Jio. En. Ko. Ken. Ryo. I loved it, but I got a lot quieter and I stopped making friends after what that classmate said. Don't base your personality off something that one person said. If you want to run your mouth, run your mouth. Someone says some cross crap like that classmate did, reply back with wow, tough crowd. Don't let other people determine who you are. It depends a lot on the other person. I love telling stories, but obviously me telling stories for hours would be very one-sided. I love finding other storytellers. My best friend is one and we can sit for hours sharing stories back and forth, asking each other questions and relating experiences. There's always a million side tangents for background information or what have you. It's so great to be able to share like that with someone. Alcohol, weed and C all make it pretty easy. For example, it's easy to go pub for 4 hours with mates. Otherwise it depends. With one-on-one it can get tiring. Too many people and it tends to split into smaller conversations. 4 or 5 seems best. Depends on the person too. New person equals more to talk about in theory, but it's about finding something interesting. Some people are quite guarded with strangers and don't like answering questions about themselves. If they're open though, getting to know them can take hours, especially if they talk about deeper personal stuff, which is also more interesting, preventing it from getting tiring. Close friends or spouses can be difficult if you see each other every day, but if not it's pretty easy, you just catch up. If you do see them that often though, then you should be comfortable enough with the silence that the conversation can be intermittent when you're just hanging out. Helps in these cases to have an activity that doesn't require 100% attention but helps entertain a bit or sparks conversation, like a movie or show you've both already seen. Only one person I talk so long with. We talk about art, history, society, culture, architecture and personal stuff. There. We don't. Conversation needs 2 people. You don't need to be the one to always bring up stuff. Also, being able to sit together in silence goes a long way. There's not a lot of people I can talk to for hours. I'm an introvert and talking for me is legit exhausting. But if I'm gonna talk, I'd prefer to skip small talk and have real conversations, and real conversations tend to last a while. My wife and I can talk for hours no problem. We'll start on a subject and by the end of the convo we've branched off into 30 different sub-subjects. LOL. It really depends on the person too. If they can hold the conversation it comes easy, but I have a hard time finding people like that. Simple. I just pull random things out of my butt due to my ADHD. I could talk to someone about stupid things like did you know flies hum in F and stuff of various natures for hours. LOL works like a charm until I don't shut up. This is definitely my boyfriend. Sometimes I'll start a conversation with my mom, then I'll be done talking after like 5 minutes and he'll be happily carrying on the conversation as long as he can think of something to say. Mostly it's with friends and we just talk about dumb stuff and our attention spans are so short we change topics like every 10 minutes. Easy. Autistic information dumps. Get me on a topic I like and I have a tendency to monologue. My husband thinks this is why I like Isaac Asimov. He has a tendency to drop a ton of info all at once. If I'm not interested in the topic, it's impossible to be interested enough to keep a conversation going. I have ADHD. My roomie is naturally talkative. We easily cleared 5 hours of conversation just naturally flowing from one subject to another with no issue whatsoever. XD. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.